This episode is brought to you by Sutra Beauty. Welcome to my first podcast, Hillel.
Thank you. It's an honor and pleasure to be here with you.
The honor is mine, believe me. This is my first episode. I wanted to dedicate it to a cause
What?
very close
This
to
is your
me.
very first episode?
Yes, my very first episode, and you're the first person.
Okay.
You're
Wow. Oh
very
my gosh.
special, Hillel, because
Thank you,
this.
Sarah.
Yeah, this cause is very special, and it's about women's rights, especially women that are oppressed by religious extremists. And I wanted to dedicate this episode to the women of Iran and Afghanistan. And I couldn't think of a more valuable voice, a more impactful person other than my good friend Hillel Neuer. And I would
Thank
like
you.
to tell people a little bit about you. You're a human rights lawyer, and you were named in 2017 as one of the top 100 most influential Jewish voices or Jewish people in the world. But besides that, can you tell us a little about you? How did you end up in Geneva? What inspired you, to take this crazy, like difficult path of human rights and take on all this responsibility?
Yeah, well, I started getting involved on human rights issues professionally, I would say, when I was on college. Though when I was a kid, I was sensitive to certain issues. When I was a kid, there were Russians in Soviet Union who wanted to move to Israel, and they were persecuted for that. One of them, his name is Natan Sharansky. He was sent to prison for 9 years in the Gulag, and his only crime was that he wanted to move to Israel. So we used to go demonstrate when I was like 9 years old,
Wow.
in the freezing cold in Montreal. So that was my first, personal experience. But then when I was in college and law school, I studied with the human rights lawyer, Professor Irwin Cotler, who's one of Canada's, who is Canada's most famous human rights lawyer and is one of the most prominent human rights lawyers in the world today.
Mhm.
And that's when I started thinking more, more concretely about human rights. That was when I was in law school. And then when I worked as a lawyer in New York for a few years, I did human rights practice on the side.
Mhm.
And then this opportunity opened up in Geneva, and it was really a tremendous opportunity. And I've been there now for 18 years. And although a lot of the work is frustrating because the UN is a very hard nut to crack, you may have seen the recent statistics. The latest membership of the Human Rights Council is 70% non-democracies.
Wow.
So
I didn't know this, but I'm not
yes, so
surprised.
the members in 2023 include Algeria, Somalia, Eritrea, Kazakhstan, Bangladesh, China, Cuba, um, and Vietnam, and the list
Mhm.
goes on. Countries that are either authoritarian states where the army might crush the media in places like Pakistan, or places like Qatar, where thousands of migrants may have been killed in order to, well, died in working. We don't know the exact numbers to
Mhm.
enable the World Cup, to full on totalitarian states like China and Cuba that are police states. And together they represent 70% of the Human Rights Council. So I say that's a very hard nut to crack, and it's very frustrating. And you've been there,
Mhm.
Sarah. You testified at the UN, so
Yeah.
you had a taste of what it can be like. But at the same time, part of my job is bringing people like you, people who are courageous and who paid a tremendous price and who risked a great deal for principles, for humanity, for basic humanity. And we brought people like yourself. And I know we're going to talk about Afghanistan and Iran, but there are people, amazing women that we've brought from there to testify at the UN, and human rights activists who've been in prison and who've
Mhm.
risked everything. People from Cuba, China, Pakistan, Venezuela, Russia. My friend Vladimir Karamurza, who's in prison as we speak because he dared to protest Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine. He's
Wow.
sitting in prison in Moscow. So part of our work is to meet these people, and although what they've been through is very difficult emotionally, it's very inspiring the fact that they continue to do the work they do and pay the price because they believe in something that is noble.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask you something.
Humanity.
Yeah, I want to ask you something. So every day when I wake up, like the first account that I run to on Twitter is yours, because I literally want to see like what's going on in the world. And you're always post like you basically like I feel like you're the guy that people needs to go to if they want to know anything that's going on in the world. And you
Anything depressing, come to my account.
well,
And
anything
Sarah,
depressing,
some of
but
my tweets,
yeah.
you know that some of my tweets are actually based on truth. You know that.
Mm-hmm. Listen, so like for
Some
you,
of them are based on truth.
I have a good question for you. Listen, because I do this a lot on Twitter as well. I try to know what's going on in the world, but like how do you like stay updated? Like how do you take on all this information every day? Like it's a lot of work. How do you do that?
Right. So, combination of things. I mean, one thing, I worked as a lawyer at a very serious law firm in New York. And one of the things it taught me was to be very cautious and careful. And one of the things that people can rely on is that I'm not posting anything that I see, um, because we're all consuming lots of information. I follow accounts of people that I trust, and we work very hard to only post credible information. And if something smells fishy, we don't post it. Now, obviously, if you're posting news, people share things, and sometimes you may not have it fully validated. For example, things that are happening in Iran, there's CNN is not there on the spot for most of these things. It's coming from someone's video camera, from their telephone. So you can't always know 100% certain if you want to get the latest things. But I trust certain people, and so one of the things that I do is try to share only from very credible sources. I will never share anything that's just random. And so it's looking through following a lot of information. We have a team, I have staff who go through what's happening at the UN and try to double and triple check things to make sure, as a lot of people get things wrong. Some people are deliberately misinforming, others are just broken telephone. That happens, someone makes a mistake, and then so it's a lot of the sources are out there, but it's my experience that I'm following people that I think are credible, and checking things 2 times, 3 times to make sure that the information is precise and reliable.
No, I remember when I came to Geneva and I went with you to the United Nations, and I remember I saw your staff. They were not only recording everything being said, but also writing it down. And I said, is that necessary? And you're like, yeah, like we want to make sure. I remember, like you even recorded the entire whatever people were saying, during the summit, like you had your staff recording that and typing that. It was crazy. I remember that. Now, can you tell us a little bit about the UN Watch? What exactly you do, during the summit? And also, can you tell us about your latest victory that you had, about what happened with Iran?
Sure. So UN Watch was created nearly 30 years ago. It was created in 1993, so that's now 30 years ago, in Geneva, not by me. I wasn't around when it was founded. It was created by Ambassador Morris Abram. He was a great American. He was a civil rights leader. He worked very closely with Martin Luther King in Georgia in the South, fighting discrimination against Black people. And Morris Abram was a Jewish lawyer who grew up in Georgia, in a small town called Fitzgerald, Georgia. And during World War II, he served with the Nuremberg war tribunals in Germany. The Allies, after the war, had war tribunals to prosecute the senior Nazis.
Wow.
And that's when many of the principles of international criminal law were developed after World War II. And Morris Abrams served there, and then he came back to America, and he was very active in Atlanta, Georgia, fighting for equal treatment of Black people. It wasn't popular in the 1950s. You didn't get any points for it. It became more accepted in the 60s, and then later, and today, Black Lives Matter and that sort of thing. Everyone supports that. But in the 1950s, in Atlanta, Georgia, that was not good for your career. But Morris Abram was a leader, and I would say in the 1960s, he was probably one of the most famous one of the most prominent non-Black people fighting for the Black equality cause. He was close with Martin Luther King, and he served 4 American presidents in various different ways. He served as a U.S. expert on UN commissions. At the Human Rights Commission in the 1960s, he drafted the UN Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and eventually he was made U.S. ambassador to the United Nations headquarters in Geneva in the late 80s. And then he retired, and he had the idea to create UN Watch. And for him, UN Watch was, I would say, as U.S. ambassador, he saw terrible things. He saw the Assad regime saying anti-Semitic things and at the Human Rights Commission. And he said the UN is a vital body. We need it to work properly, but there needs to be an outside organization that would monitor it. So UN Watch was created as an independent monitor to uphold the UN Charter. The UN Charter is a noble document, speaks of human rights, fundamental freedoms, international peace and security, but it's too often abused by regimes that come to the council. So there was always a universal mandate to hold the UN accountable to its own principles, and a particular mandate. Morris Abraham was also a Jewish leader. He was head of the American Jewish Committee. He was fighting for the freedom of Soviet Jewry. And he saw how Israel was singled out in an obsessive way by many UN bodies, and that amounted to discrimination against the Jewish people. So the UN has a pathological obsession with Israel. We saw that there's 1 resolution on North Korea and 15 on Israel. So that's absurd. And so UN Watch speaks out against that. And when various UN bodies misuse their noble mandate to speak out for millions of victims around the world and instead spend a lot of their time scapegoating Israel, we're the first to speak out on that. So that's the work of UN Watch, and we're active in diplomacy. We meet diplomats, try to encourage them to do the right thing. We're active in communication in the world, as you know. You follow us on social media. We have hundreds and thousands of followers on social media. People can follow UN Watch on Twitter, on Instagram. I think it's called United Nations Watch on Instagram, and UN Watch on Facebook. And my name is Hillel Neuer, and I'm on all those platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And we bring people to testify, people like yourself and many other people. Our videos have been seen 30 million times on YouTube, elsewhere. And we go after UN officials who abuse their mandate and call them out for that. So that's kind of in a nutshell. And I'd say we punch above our weight. We're under 10 people, but we're in the news about 600-700 times a year, very active on social media. And people tend to hear about us. If they're interested in the UN, they probably know about UN Watch.
Okay. Now, can you tell us about your latest victory that you had by removing Iran from the UN body? How did you do that? And was it difficult? And did the UN, was it easy? Were they on board, or was it hard to convince them? How did you feel?
Well, it was a very strange thing. The first thing that happened was in April 2021, so more than a year and a half ago, the United Nations elected the Iran regime, the Islamic Republic of Iran, to its highest women's rights body. I'm going to say that again for people who think I might have been making a joke or they misheard. The UN elected the Islamic Republic of Iran, one of the world's most misogynistic regimes, a regime that treats women as worth half a man in various laws dealing with inheritance and divorce and damage that might be caused to women, and that forces women to dress in certain ways, to hide parts of their body, cover their hair, has laws about when they need to have a male guardian, and which arrests women's rights activists, tortures them, rapes them, and for the past few months has been killing women for protesting for their rights. So this regime, which is an enemy of women, was elected to the UN Women's Rights Commission. It's called the Commission on the Status of Women. It's been around since the 1940s. And when this happened, Sarah, everyone was silent. The United States was silent. Europe was silent.
I'm not surprised. Yeah.
The large human rights groups like Amnesty International, silent. They didn't say a thing. Each one for their own reasons, okay? The member states, because maybe they're embarrassed by it, but they were too weak to stop it. Large human rights groups, maybe they didn't want to embarrass the UN. Maybe in their minds they have kind of many of their politics are anti-Western, anti-imperialist. So maybe they think, oh well, who's to say who belongs? Maybe Canada belongs there, and maybe the Islamic Republic of Iran. Who are we to tell? We don't want to be seen as imperialistic. So how could we say? So they have some strange views. Some NGOs. And well, we thought it was absurd. And that's the common sense. Often at the UN, common sense is missing. We said this is outrageous. We exposed it. We made it go viral. It was picked up by members of parliament around the world. They thought this was crazy, became a subject of debate in the Parliament of Canada, Norway, other countries. It was media headline, and we didn't give up on it. We kept speaking out. We had a press conference. We had Kaveh Shahrouz, who's an important activist in Canada, Iranian-Canadian lawyer, Professor Erwin Kotler, others, in a press conference. And we kept campaigning on this issue. And certainly in September, when the Masa Amini protests began, there was greater attention in the world to what we always knew. Not new. The situation of women in Iran is not new. The fact that this regime murders their own people, kills protesters, that's not new.
But the world just picked it up for some reason. I don't know. This has been happening for years. But you know what? I think literally why it kept going this time is because they realized finally the world is paying attention. Because this happened almost every year. I remember back in 2020 and 2019, they also had protests and they always die down, because the world doesn't care. But this time, because the US paid attention and celebrities and Hollywood basically, they paid attention. So they decided, you know what, this time we will not stop. And I think this time maybe it got even uglier and deadlier than before, because they were taking, from what I've been seeing in the news, taking massive numbers of students and people, raping them, killing them. I don't think I've ever seen them do that that much before. They used to shoot protesters. Maybe that was the extent of it, but now it's crazy. But I'm so glad, and I was so happy when I saw your tweet, when you said you were able to remove them. That was amazing. Now, I wanted to ask you, what do you think the future holds for Iran? Do you think this revolution will continue? Do you think there will be international support, or do you think it's going to die out?
On the one hand, it seems to me that this is not going to go away. The people of Iran have said enough, including many young people, and they're just not going to put up with it anymore. And women don't want to feel enslaved by the mullahs and to have to wear the hijab and other restrictions. And they said, that's it. We're taking it off, and we're not afraid of you anymore. But they paid the price. 15,000 arrested, 18,000 we don't know. As you said, people tortured, raped. It's a very high price. And the regime is strong, and they're willing to do, it seems, almost anything. So on the one hand, I don't think you could put the genie back in the bottle. I don't think that now in January 2023, we can ever go back to before September, when there were protests, but never anything that widespread.
Yeah.
Iranians explained to me that some of the previous protests, some maybe in 2009 were by the more educated people, the reformists, the green movement. Some maybe in 2019 were by poor people who didn't have food and were protesting that. But this time they said it was everyone, religious, non-religious, poor, well-educated, wealthy, that everyone just had enough in 150 cities. So I don't see how they can put the genie back in the bottle. I don't think the people will ever go back to what it was before. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, the regime is strong, and the world, are they really standing in solidarity? A little bit. They did. America, I give credit to the United States. In the end, this only happened, we campaigned for a year and a half, but all we could do is plant the seed. We could make noise. We did. We drafted a resolution. We submitted it to the State Department. So maybe we gave them the idea and we were the advocate, but in the end, the heavy lifting was the United States pushed for it. Europe wasn't so excited about doing it. They don't like to interfere with how they do things at the UN. They're very strange deals that they do. but the US made it happen. So, the US has done some things. The European countries have done certain things, sanctions and so on, but they still offer to negotiate. Negotiating is with the regime, that's empowering them, that's legitimizing them. So we're getting mixed messages.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. Do you think that there's a chance the US will re-enter Iran into the nuclear deal while they're violating, international laws and killing their own people? Because I remember I saw a video of one Iranian woman. She spoke to President Biden and she told him, she said, please, like, don't do the nuclear deal. And she said, I think maybe everyone saw the video. And then he said, oh, like, we have to talk to them. No, I cannot, let it die like this deal. We have to talk to them. She said, but they're murderers, like, they're killing people. And he said, yeah, but they also hold nuclear power. So we have to. And that was kind of like, I felt like a slap in the face for, the Iranians that are protesting right now. Like, it was a little bit of mixed signal. So what do you think is going to happen with Biden administration from what you're observing? Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. Certainly, they began very much wanting to appease Iran and to do a deal. That is why a year and a half ago, when Iran was elected to the Women's Rights Commission, I'll never forget that they asked the State Department, the Associated Press, Matthew Lee, asked the State Department spokesman Ned Price, do you condemn the election of the Iranian Islamic regime to the Women's Rights Commission? He wouldn't condemn it. Yeah. Can you imagine? The United States State Department. He said sometimes certain countries get elected that have poor human rights. So indirectly, he was willing to say something, but he kept asking, I ask you, do you specifically condemn? He wouldn't do it. It was very clear watching that. I mean, I was shocked because how could the US not condemn that? And it was clear the Biden administration came into office wanting to appease. The head of their Iran policy is a man named Rob Malley. He's someone who's appeasing the regime. He wants to appease the regime. So these people, they're connected to NIAC, who are apologists for the regime. So that's how they came in. I do think the Masa Amini protests influenced them. I do think Biden feels it. I'm not sure if Biden's in full control. There's many other people who are powerful in the administration. So it remains to be seen. I hope that the US realizes that a regime that will do this to their own people, that will torture, rape, kill their own young people for protesting, you think they're going to respect the nuclear deal with America and the West? It's like, why would you even want to sign a deal with these people? So, I know that there are well-intentioned people who think that this can delay the nuclear weapons and everything, but certainly the price you pay is that you empower them. The last time when Obama did his deal, it gave them hundreds of billions of dollars in funds which were used to overrun Iraq and to send militias into Lebanon and things that you know about better than I do, but all across the Middle East. The guy who was killed 2 years ago, Soleimani, he had all this money and he used it. Iran took over the whole Middle East.
Exactly.
The Abraham Accords is in part, in reaction because Iran was taking over the whole Middle East.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Because of that, you know what? I remember also right when Biden got elected, there was another crazy policy with Ned Price. I remember I saw when he tried to remove the what is it called, the Houthis, the Iran-backed militias in Yemen. He removed them from the terrorist list. Like, what is that? We're literally talking about people who their flags read "Death to America," "Death to America," "Death to Israel," "Curse upon the Jews," "Victory to Islam." They have sworn to destroy the US. They have they have sworn to kill Jews. Like, how do you remove such people from a terrorist list? Like, I'm so angry when I saw that. And that's how I knew they were trying to appease the Iranian regime, It's insane. Really insane.
Yeah, when there were things like that, you watch it and you're like, what's gotten into your head? So,
and how Americans are quiet about that, like I live in California, as you know, and the majority of people here are Democrats. And sometimes I have these conversations with them and it really, it pains me and it really angers me. You have no idea when I tell them these things, when I tell them about about our foreign policy and what we're doing and how it's harming millions of innocent people in the Middle East. And all what they tell me, we don't care. Trump is out of power. Like, to them, it's all about, a scary orange man is out. So we cannot, like, we don't want to question Biden. And like, that is so sad and heartbreaking, because it can be any politician. You can love that politician, support that politician, but you need to put human rights first. And it amazes me, because this is California, the most liberal, the people who always are for social justice and equality, but when it comes to the rest of the world, they really don't care. And like, I don't know, like, I just had to say it on the podcast, because it's something that happens for me daily, and I have this conversation. I've had fights with people over this. I get so heated. It's such a heated conversation, because I cannot understand what makes you full of compassion and heart when it comes to Americans, when it comes to equality, social justice here, but you are literally dead inside when it comes to other countries. And in speaking of that, let's jump to Afghanistan and what happened in Afghanistan, and how our media and our people are, I feel like, almost completely quiet on it. No one even wants to talk about it. Going back to Afghanistan, and I feel like our media are trying to be quiet about it, not talk about it, because they know we really messed up there, and they're trying to cover our mistakes. What do you think is going to happen, especially right now with Taliban, with their ban on women education and their ban on women rights to, have employment and work?
Look, it's very depressing. The West failed. Whose fault it is, that would be a whole lecture, and I'm not an expert on everything that happened in the past 2 decades, but we failed. We went into Afghanistan. I say we, I'm Canadian. Canada was part of it, but many Western countries went in there, led by the United States, obviously, and spent billions of dollars. I don't know what if it was a trillion or huge amounts of money. And in the end, after 20 years, we left, and the country's back in the hands of the Taliban. And so it's very depressing. And clearly there were major failures. Whether it's all the West's fault, I don't know. At the end of the day, it's limited to what Western countries can do. In the end, the local people will decide. But it's very depressing. The Taliban's taken over. We were told they were Taliban 2.0. No, the Taliban, that was 20 years ago. It's new. We met them in Qatar. It's all fine. And let's be honest, Trump did the first deal with them. It was signed by Trump. He criticized later, but he signed the deal. Biden implemented the deal. It was both administrations went for this. They wanted out. They handed it over to the Taliban. Trump says he would have done it differently, maybe. But in any case, went over to the Taliban. The former Afghan leadership fled the country. Zelensky is staying and fighting. They did not have a Zelensky. They fled. And there's no 2.0. We're back at 1.0. We're at 0.0. I mean, they just announced that women can't go to high school anymore. Girls can't go to high school, which is terrible. Women can't go to university. So women were crying. Some men walked out of the exams in protest. Then they announced women can't work for NGOs. So we're going back to, we're not just going back 25 years. We're going back 1,000 years. And Iran is terrible. Taliban is even more terrible. And to be honest, most people are forgetting about it. I'm not seeing, everyone has the Ukraine flag in their Twitter feed and everything, and that's great. Russia is committing war crimes, and it's despicable what Putin is doing. He's firing missiles at innocent people across Ukraine, and it's terrible. But let's not forget Afghanistan.
I know that's the thing, like, to me, I just feel that there's a little bit of hypocrisy. Like, you show some countries, favor, you care about them, in other countries you don't. Sorry, we have, I think, 5 minutes left. So let's, I wanted to ask you, what kind of advice do you have for young activists, who wants to join maybe your mission, and like do exactly what you're doing? What is your advice to them? How can we be more impactful like you?
Everyone has to figure out where they are and what they can do. You know, for example, you're someone who's in California and you have access to certain people. You're in a particular place and location, certain kind of voice, and you figure out where you can make a difference given the opportunities available to you. And the same, I would say, people watching from whether they're in Europe or in Asia or in Africa, everyone has to figure out their context where they can make a difference. First thing to do is to get informed, as you asked me before. So follow people that you trust, that you believe
Follow
are.
Hillel Neuer and follow the UN Watch
So
#1. Yes.
thank you. Follow Hillel Neuer and UN Watch. You can also follow. We have our Human Rights Summit once a year, the Geneva Summit for Human Rights. You can follow Geneva Summit. That's another source. And and other people. If you care about Iran, people like Masih Alinejad are amazing. Afghanistan, there's people like Zarifa Ghaffari, who was the youngest female mayor in Afghanistan. So I think people should follow great activists. Step one is to get informed. And then step two is to figure out, if some people want to be a professional activist, that means you may want to study journalism or international law or human rights or government. Those are typical disciplines, but you can come at it from different ways. You came at this from your own way. And I know people who've come at it from different ways. Some people come at it as an influencer. That's fine, especially social media offers opportunities. If you have a following, if there's people in Iran who have 500,000 followers, and I look who they are, and some are actresses, some are in beauty products, but they're using their platform. One of the activists that I work with is Nazanin Afshinjam. Was like you, she was a beauty queen from Canada, and she did it to raise attention to Iran, and that's what she does. So everyone should figure out how they can use their platform and try to amplify the information and speak out for individuals who are in prison. That's a huge thing. Let the world know they're not forgotten.
Well, thank you. That's the best advice. Thank you so much, Hillel. Your voice is always valuable, and I really want people, I want to make sure for everyone, to go and follow your account. If you care about human rights, if you care about humanity, about the world, they should definitely follow you on Instagram, on Twitter. I know I'm one of those people that, I learned so much from you, and I want to thank you for making the time, to
thank you, Sarah. Before we go, I want to make sure that I say that I like to follow you because you're someone who I look up to. You grew up in Iraq, and a lot of terrible things happened in your country, and you showed tremendous courage of spirit. You became famous for people like me when I saw that you posed for a picture with Miss Israel. That was forbidden in your country. Death threats were against you. Your family had to flee. And many others like you, if those who did that said, oh, it was a mistake, deleted. You didn't do that. And since that happened, you've used the platform you had as a voice for humanity, bringing Arabs and Jews, Arabs and Israelis, Muslims and Jews together, other nationalities, and really a model, I think, for so many. And that's why for UN Watch, you're our ambassador of peace. And you're someone who put things on the line yourself for the cause of humanity. So God bless you.
Thank you. God bless you too, Hillel. Thanks.